Good morning. One Virginia dude this morning, uh, coming at you from the heart of beautiful Central Virginia. Well, I drank my Brondo, so I'm ready for today's news. Um, it has electrolytes. If you don't get the reference, go check out the movie called Idiocracy. Well, I'm just chilling out with our foster dog here this morning. We got this beautiful hound from the SPCA. We're fostering her for 1 to 2 weeks so she can be adopted by her forever family. Nevertheless, go lie down. Go lie down. Um, Many things in the news today. They were really talking about Joe Biden yesterday with his diagnosis of prostate cancer. And the people, the political pundits are saying, well, did he have this a long time? Obviously, he probably did. And I am no fan of Joe Biden. I think he has always been a very um, below the belt kind of politician. He's always been a mean, vindictive, angry, hateful person. His career should have ended in 1988 when he ran for president as a Democrat when he was still a senator in Delaware. And he ran as a Democrat and he got caught lying and plagiarizing. His career should have been over then. But nevertheless, I see people online saying that, oh, he deserves this, or, well, good for him. And I'm like, nah, I'm sorry. I can't stand Joe Biden, but you know what? You don't wish cancer on anybody. My mother died of an aggressive form of lung cancer a little over 9 years ago. And she never smoked a single cigarette in her life. And when I hear somebody say that they wish somebody would have that or deserve, nah, come on, people, we're better than that. You can lay pop smoke at Joe Biden all you want. You can pop smoke at Donald Trump all you want, but you don't wish that on somebody. That's just uncalled for. But I do believe that it's kind of interesting how people are waking up now and suddenly like, oh, he had some health issues and we didn't even know it. Yeah, they knew it. They just covered it up. And I suspect that if Donald Trump ends up having similar decline in his mental faculties, that the people who are close to him are probably going to do whatever they can to, make him look better. There are rumors that uh, I don't think any of them are substantiated, but they were saying that Reagan was starting to lose some of his faculties as he neared the end of his presidency. And, you know, maybe he was slowing down a little bit, but, um, Woodrow Wilson, his wife probably ran things in the White House after he had a stroke and she was still running things. But with Joe Biden, who controlled that auto pen? How many executive orders were issued that shouldn't have been issued? Who has that power? Would that be a federal offense to do that? Would it be forgery, treason? I don't know, but it's obvious he was not in control of himself. But nevertheless, as he heads into the sunset of his life, you know, I I honestly say I'm glad he's out of the White House. I wish he would have been out a long time ago, but I don't wish any ill will on the guy. He's in the sunset of his life. He just needs to be around his family and friends, and let the historians, um, heap praise on him or heap criticism on him after he's gone. It typically takes a couple years, probably 5 to 10 years, before an administration can be truly evaluated by historians, anyway. But yeah, like I said, I really can't stand the guy, but you know what? You don't wish cancer on somebody, and you never take joy in somebody else getting cancer. That is just not cool. I don't care what you think of somebody. You just don't do that, especially if you've had somebody in your family pass away from cancer. How would you like it if somebody said, oh, well, she deserved that because she smoked 3 packs a day? Well, even that's not called for. But my mom never had a single cigarette in her life. She died of a very aggressive form of lung cancer. So, and my grandmother, she smoked like a diesel locomotive pulling a freight train over a mountain. And she smoked constantly and she drank heavily and she lived to be 94 after she cooked everything in lard. My other grandmother lived to be 88 and she was a chain smoker. So, you know, when your number comes up, your number comes up. But the other thing I wanted to get into, I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about the SALT tax. No, that's not something that uh, goes on salt you get at a restaurant or the grocery store. It's the state and local tax deduction on your federal income tax return. There's some arguments in the Republican Party. I suppose some Democrats are going to be concerned about it too. But your real estate tax and things like that, and your state income taxes, uh, you can write off that on your federal income tax. And they want to raise the threshold because property values have gone up and thus taxes have gone up. Uh, in states that have income tax, they've gone up too. And they're saying, oh, well, it's only fair. These people are, and it's Republicans in blue states are the biggest ones about raising the cap. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if I were king for a day, we would have a flat rate income tax with no exemptions, no deductions, no loopholes. Everybody, you would pay the same percentage. If your income was higher, you'd pay the same percentage as somebody with low income. But that would be fair in the end. Everybody would have skin in the game. Everybody would feel the pain. Even better would be to scrap the income tax altogether and replace it with um, like a national sales tax, a consumption-based tax. However, that would require amending the Constitution, and I don't think there's the impetus for that right now. But nonetheless, you shouldn't be mad at the president or the Republicans in Congress about arguing over the SALT deduction. You should be up in arms about the governor and the legislature of your state. If you live in Illinois, California, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and so on, you should be angry at your state for doing this because you are basically asking federal taxpayers to, through the back door, subsidize the big spending politicians in your state. Now, here in Virginia, we're a medium to high tax state. We're not as bad as New York or California, but we have personal property tax on our vehicles every year. We have state sales tax. We have a state income tax. We have many jurisdictions have a meals tax. So if you go to Gordonsville which is a little town inside of, I believe it's in Orange County, if you dine at a restaurant, your tax hit is about 11%. Yeah, I think it's like 5% for the state, and then like 4% for the county and 2% for the town. So you get hit 3 different taxes on your meal. And that's in Virginia, land of the founding fathers. They'd be rolling in their graves. We also have toll roads that I believe all but one road in the state, it's double taxation. We do have one privately owned toll road, but we have a gasoline tax, we have excise tax, we have a business professional occupational license tax, we have hotel taxes, yeah, sales tax, income tax, personal property tax, vehicle tax. Some places you have to pay an annual fee to get your emissions done in your car, and the personal property tax you pay that every year. It's based on the percentage of book value of your car, and it varies by county and by city, but nevertheless, a tax at the local level is still a tax. So is it, but these localities, like if you live in, let's say you're a Republican and you live in upstate New York, you're going to be paying exorbitant taxes at so many levels because of Democrats who live in New York City. I understand, you should be, it's justifiable to be angry at the high taxes you have to pay, but that's not the fault of the federal government. That's your state. And when you enable people to write off their high real estate taxes and high state income tax and things like that, personal property tax or whatever, it only encourages your state politicians to waste more money because the citizens will say, oh, yeah, well, I get to write it off on my federal tax. Now, with that deduction, which should be gone, we need to go to a simpler, flatter tax. Now the argument is over, well, how do we pay for tax cuts? Well, you don't really pay for tax cuts. You have to cut spending. Now, the federal government is way out of control in spending. But many states are too. Even here in Virginia, which is not one of the really bad states, although with so many Democrats in our legislature and so many Democrat administrations as governor, they've slowly, the taxes have been going up, but just maybe not as fast as in other states. But our tax burden in Virginia, the size of the government has increased exponentially faster than the population growth. So if your population goes up, say 15% over 30 years, why should your tax burden be going up like 50%? It's disproportionate. And it's because there's a lot of waste. Here in Virginia, you have one of the things they did when they changed our speed limit many years ago, they went out and bought all new signs. Okay. Well, what they should have done, and I've seen this done in other states, they have the vinyl. It's like a real strong adhesive. It's like a sticker, but it's just thick, and they just print them off with 70 on it. Now you can print those for probably a couple dollars each. It's about a foot by a foot, and you just peel it off. It's like the kind of adhesive that you stick on your license plate tab. It won't come off. You could take that and stick it over the 65. They did that years ago when they lowered the speed limit to 55. They put up, a lot of states use the adhesive, and it's reflective, so you can see it at night, and much cheaper than spending, $80 or $90 for a new steel sign. You already bought the sign, just put the adhesive over it. But see, they didn't, look at how much money they spent. And it's probably because somebody in the state legislature had a brother-in-law who owns a business making signs. There's all kinds of things that they do that waste money. Look at uh, the state liquor system. In Virginia, the government has a socialist liquor monopoly. And, why? Why is the state in the business of selling liquor? They should have a taxing authority and some degree of regulatory enforcement power, and that's it. You shouldn't be buying your Jim Beam from the state. That makes no sense at all. The only state I know that's worse than Virginia in that regard is Pennsylvania. I think you have to buy wine from the state too. At least in Virginia, you can buy beer and wine at any grocery store, a CVS, a 7-Eleven, or whatnot. They just can't sell spirits. Um, but if they privatized it, which basically let the private sector handle distribution, sales, warehousing, merchandising, wholesaling, marketing, and all that, and just have the state just enforce the franchise agreements with distributors, have the state, make sure that people aren't running illegal distilleries, and regular law enforcement can enforce underage laws. You don't need ABC agents to do that. Any law enforcement officer in the Commonwealth of Virginia can make an arrest for underage alcohol possession. I just think that we need to get a handle on what government does for us, but also we need to think about what government does to us in the process. Um, but I don't want to get too sidetracked on that. Another thing that is going on is there's supposed to be peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. And I think Donald Trump had suggested that the Vatican be involved in the middle of it. I don't really have anything against the Vatican being involved in that, but that's kind of out of their wheelhouse. Maybe they just would facilitate the talks. I always thought that meeting in Geneva in Switzerland, you get the active parties involved, you sit them down, and you know you start just with an open mind with discussion. You don't try and look at it as being a winner or a loser. You're going to have a hard time getting an agreement done. And I may not agree with how Trump does things, but I do agree with him saying that, look, like 5,000 people a week, young Ukrainians and young Russians are being, pushed into that meat grinder, and they're killing each other. And you don't want to get into a war of attrition between two Slavic peoples. That never turns out very well. Russia obviously has many more people than Ukraine does, but Ukraine has the backing of NATO. and Western Europe and all that. Ukraine is not even a NATO member, but they seem to have uh, the backing of NATO because they're concerned about Russia. You know, have Russia having tanks rolling into Berlin, which I don't see that happening. But nevertheless, at least if they can get people talking. Another odd thing is that there was a graduation speech yesterday. I believe it was from George Washington University, which is a very expensive elite school. And this young woman, I don't know if she's a lady or not. I only heard the sound. She didn't sound very ladylike, but nevertheless, this woman was giving a commencement speech, and she kept talking about genocide. The school is funding genocide, and I'm like, well, what does she mean by that? Well, apparently, she's part of the BDS, the boycott, divest, and sanction movement against the state of Israel. Okay, so you don't like Jews. All right, we get it. Um, but you can't keep talking about genocide when by default you're supporting Hamas, which when they say from the river to the sea, that's genocide. They're talking about erasing the state of Israel, which is genocide because there are 13 million people in Israel and maybe 7 million of them are Jewish. It's the world's only Jewish state. So when you talk about eradicating the only Jewish state, that's genocide. No matter how you slice it, that's actually genocide. And they'll say, well, no, we only support the Palestinian people. We don't support Hamas. Well, you're supporting what's in the Hamas charter, which is getting rid of Israel. And when you say from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, um, that's all of Israel. That's not like, well, we want to have a Palestinian homeland side by side, a two-state solution. No, you're advocating genocide. So if you want to say that, say, well, we want to displace everybody and move them out and get rid of the state of Israel. Just come out and say that. Okay, you can show the show your hate, do it, but don't try and lie about it and say, well, we're fighting against genocide. Because if you look in there, who are the Palestinian Arabs exactly? Was there ever a country that was actually called Palestine? It's sort of a region. It's like Central America. Central America contains like Costa Rica, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Panama, Nicaragua, etc. That's Central America. There's not, you know, somebody can say, well, I'm from Central America. Okay, well, which one? It's like, well, I'm from Palestine. Okay, well, what are you? Are you Jordanian or are you Israeli? Because a Palestinian Jew would be an Israeli. There are also Arabs who live in Israel and have Israeli citizenship. Um, you have a broad mix of people over there, and they're trying to push this narrative that the Jews have only been there since 1948. But anybody who thinks we can just come in there as Westerners and fix that problem, it doesn't work that way. And I really don't know what the solution is, but the solution is not to accuse other people of wanting genocide or saying you want to stop genocide when you're supporting genocide against a whole group of people. That's not going to fly. Unfortunately, with the media and the education system and everything else, nobody questions it. Um, I used to believe in a two-state solution. It would be great if you could have people living side by side, like people live in Ontario side by side with the people in Quebec. But the dynamics of it are so much different over there. Um, it's even more confusing in Israel because you have Arabs who have lived there as long as the Jews have, and they've lived side by side, and they have Israeli citizenship. They can vote, they can own property, they can serve in the Knesset, they can serve as judges on courts, and these are Arabs who are Muslims too, and Christians. Um, but the only obligation they don't have is to serve in the Israeli military. So, but to have a two-state solution, both sides have to want it. And I honestly think a lot of the Israelis don't want it. I think if they came up with a viable solution, most Israeli people would say, okay, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have them next to us. But the problem is militarily, would you bisect Israel to where it's only 9 miles wide at the narrowest section, where it could be cut off by mortar fire? Or do you have the so-called Palestinian territory where you have Judea and Samaria, also fictitiously called the West Bank, but you have Judea and Samaria, and you have a lot of Palestinian Arabs in that area, and then you have Gaza, or if you're from New York, Gaza. But if you have the Gaza Strip, okay, you've got these two, then they're bisected. Then you've got Israel straight up the middle, and then you've got these two different areas that are under Palestinian authority control. Well, is that fair to those people? So I don't know how you're going to come up with a fair solution there, but I wish people would change the rhetoric a little bit. You know, it's like don't say that you're fighting genocide while you're advocating genocide, you know, out of the other side of your mouth. I just wish people would change the definitions a little bit. If you believe in the eradication of Israel, then just say it. I think people would respect you more for that. As far as the United States government goes, you know, we send billions of dollars to Israel. We also send billions of dollars to our enemies. And Article 2, Section 2, I believe it's the second clause, says that the president doesn't have the authority to send any money to a foreign entity unless it's part of a treaty ratified by the Senate. So Uncle Sam is like the world's sugar daddy. We end up funding both sides of a conflict. And, you know, that never works out very well in the end. You know, it just creates more conflict down the road. But I think Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky hit on a lot of good points. You know, they call him Dr. No, and well, he doesn't sign this, but he's following the Constitution. And a lot of the Israeli special interest groups like AIPAC really lay hate on the guy because he voted against, you know, funding for Israel. And it's like, well, he's not against Israel. He's for following the Constitution and get a treaty ratified by the Senate. But he's in the House, so that's a different matter. But you know, he doesn't believe in giving any foreign aid because it's unconstitutional. So he's kind of like my spirit animal in a way. I really have a lot of respect for the guy, even though he seems like a stick in the mud. He's probably one of the only people who believes in fiscal sanity. But nevertheless, we've got a lot of issues in our country, financial, and this stuff of trying to cut, you know, 5 million here, 10 million there. I think this Doge thing is probably clinically dead by now. I think that the swamp in Washington just wants to keep going and going and going, and eventually, you know, they said that the Fed just printed another so many billions of dollars to they printed money to buy treasury bonds. I think they're trying to keep the rates below a certain point, but it's artificial. You're distorting the market. Somewhere along the line, we're going to run into a problem when we can't service the interest on the debt. We're not even trying to service the debt right now. That's just a pipe dream. Nobody's even talking about that. The people in Congress who actually believe in fiscal restraint, you could probably count them on one hand with a couple fingers missing. But we're going to get to the point, the interest on the debt now is about $1.1 to $1.2 trillion a year. And that's just the interest on the debt. That's not even paying down any principal. So you're not servicing the debt, you're servicing the interest. Well, what happens when the interest on the debt gets up to $3 or $4 trillion a year? Okay. And, you know, it's going to consume the majority of the budget. And then if you have any kind of economic slowdown, revenues to the treasury are going to decrease. So this is going to require some pain. We're going to face some austerity measures that are not going to be very pleasant. And it's almost as if people are going to act surprised when it happens. Well, we're laying the front, you know, it's like you're pushing the rock closer and closer to the edge of the cliff. And nobody should act surprised when the boulder falls off the edge. We've got some serious issues and a lot of problems coming up. And the longer we wait, the worse the train wreck is going to be at the end. And I don't think anybody wants to see what comes after in the end, because it's not going to be pretty for the entire country. It's also not going to be very good for the world. A very good friend of mine ran for office, both as a Republican and a Libertarian, and he is really on to something about how nasty the level of debt is. And he and I both have we've discussed it, and we're trying to figure out, how do we get a message of fiscal sanity into Washington, D.C. Nobody listens to the libertarians anymore. They just, they you can't, it's hard to function in a third party in a two-party system. The Democrats they don't care a whit about fiscal sanity. They just spend, 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 spend. The Republicans are just a little less evil in that regard. More like borrow instead of tax and spend, it's like borrow and spend. But both of them have been complicit in loose monetary policy being used to try to cover up reckless fiscal mismanagement. And I've talked to this. There only seems to be a very small percentage of the population who really even has a basic understanding of this and who really feels as though it's a threat and wants to do something about it. I don't know if it's because I'm a grandfather now and I think of my young grandson and the other grandchildren I'm probably going to have someday. And it's like, what kind of world are we going to leave for them? We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's the definition of insanity. But nevertheless, we'll just have to take it day by day and hope for the best. But I know that there are a lot of my fellow I like to use the word patriot. Um, Being a patriot is not the same thing as being a nationalist, but there is some overlap. I get accused oftentimes of being a nationalist, and it's like, well, you know, a patriot is somebody who loves his country and respects the government when they do things right. I think Mark Twain said that. But a nationalist is somebody who always supports the government no matter what they do. And I would say that's more like ultranationalism or blind nationalism. But, when I joined the Army, I joined the United States Army. I didn't join the World Army. Now, is that nationalistic to, stand under the American flag out above my garage? I have a big American flag that flies 24/7. Yes, it is lit up. It is lit up at night. I have another flag hanging inside my garage vertically. Now, does that make me a nationalist? In the eyes of some, it might. But, to other people, the flag doesn't mean anything. And citizenship is more like just being a territorial resident. But to some of us, it means something. I don't think that makes me a nationalist. I don't think that at all. Uh, Patriot, yeah. But a patriot is somebody you can love your own country. It doesn't mean you hate everybody else. I've been in 35 different countries on 3 different continents. And I think every country in the world has its good points and its bad points. Even some of the ones that are really poor, where there's a lot of poverty, there are still some amazing people who live in those countries and they have a sense of resolve that the rest of us couldn't relate to. If you've ever met somebody who lived under communism, the ingenuity of those people is just astounding because they had to learn how to like be MacGyver with everything. Like you'll take a ball of twine, some baling wire, some duct tape, and an old coffee filter, and they'll find a way to run a gasoline engine on kerosene or something, because necessity is the mother of invention. There's too many things we take for granted in our Western society. The old saying, first world problems, it's really true. We take it for granted that when we come home and turn on the switch that there's going to be electricity. In many parts of the world, they don't have that. Or they'll have, 3-hour blackouts whenever it gets hot. And, we turn on the air conditioner when we get hot. A lot of those people don't even have air conditioning, and if you're somewhere where it's really hot, if it's dry heat, it's not so bad. But if hot heat and humidity at night, ugh, that's really, rough to get by with. So we do take things for granted. But one thing we shouldn't take for granted is that we're always going to have economic prosperity, because, what goes up must come down. And, we have um, I would just like to say that fiat currency is not just money that you spend on a cheap Italian car. There's a high price to free money. And, my grandson is 7.5 months old now, and he's got about $95,000 of debt on his back, and he had nothing to do with creating. So, we better have a paradigm shift in the way we think about things in this country. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, a Republican, a libertarian, or a vegetarian. Um, Politicians can, for a time, can manipulate an economy, but they can't change the laws of economics. Eventually you can distort the market to a certain degree, but eventually, economic principles will rear their head. And what we're doing now is not sustainable. And it's not sustainable for us. But, if we have a severe economic collapse in the United States, it's going to bring down a lot of the rest of the world with it. And I, for one, would somehow like to prevent that from happening. And, having a Marxist revolution is not going to fix it. I know some people on the far left are like, we need to have a communist revolution, power to the people, and all this. And then you get their cousins on the other side who say, yeah, we just need to have another civil war and purge them people from our. No, you don't want to do either. You don't want Americans going to war against each other. We already did that once before. It was not very pretty. We've been in a cold civil war now for about 15 years, and only one side has done any fighting. And let's hope it stays cold. They've had a periodic outbreak here and there, but I don't want to see riots in the city this summer. I don't even live anywhere near the city. I don't live in the city, but I still don't want to see that happening in my own country. Okay. So let's hope cooler heads prevail. Before you throw that first brick, just think somebody is on the other side of that window. Anyway, I'll leave you at that. I'm rambling on too much. I need to walk the dog.